All eyes yesterday were on Strasbourg, where Ursula von der Leyen delivered her State of the European Union speech.
Before, with the Draghi report, we were talking about competitiveness, simplification, growth, and how all these stuff is extremely important. So now,
we know how hard times have been for so many families, how people are making sacrifices to make ends meet.
Every transition means costs. It could be economic transition, it could be climate transition, but this brings cost for everybody who is doing business.
I'm afraid I'm not able to give the speech more than a score of 3, and that's because I don't think it's an ambitious approach. There is barely any mention of deregulation. Simplification is only mentioned by a few words.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of Conversations in the Epicenter of the EU. My name is Bartha. I'm the director of Epicenter, the network of 12 leading free market think tanks from all across Europe. Normally, this conversation is happening from the center of Brussels, but EU politics is not only happening in Brussels, but all across the member states. And all eyes yesterday were on Strasbourg, where Ursula von der Leyen delivered her State of the European Union speech. But today, we're here in the heart of Copenhagen, where the Danish presidency is holding meetings about the same issue. And it's my pleasure to welcome Petar Ganev, senior economist from IME, our Bulgarian member think tank, and Line Andersen, an economist from CEPOS, our Danish member think tank, to discuss what exactly happened last day when Ursula von der Leyen was outlining a lot of different ideas on migration, not just on geopolitics, but very much as well. So today I would like to focus on the latter part, economic side of things. And I would like the Commission's simplification agenda, because the Commission a cut of 8 billion euros in companies. So,
And the omnibuses we have put will make a real difference. Less complex rules. Our proposal will cut per year.
8 billion euros sounds. Is this actually a meaningful reduction in the overall costs of bureaucratic compliance when it comes to EU regulations? Put the number into context, Lina, for us a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So I definitely think it will be impactful that there will be this cut in administrative burdens. But I think it's very important to remember it is the EU who proposed this regulation, and they're merely just postponing it and also simplifying it a bit. So I don't think it calls for that much praise that they're actually, what can you say, saving the businesses from these burdens because they put them on themselves, and now they're just withholding some of it. So yes, it will have an effect, but we are not there at all. There is much more needed to be done.
Petar, how much do you agree with Lina? Is there more to be done? Can the Commission cut costs further? And very specifically, what are the type of regulations that we should be looking at and changing in order to cut some of these bureaucratic compliance costs?
I think it's important for people to understand that this is not cutting regulation across the board. It's mainly focused on the corporate sustainability reporting, which is a new thing. It was created recently by the previous commission. So I don't see that as a game changer. We had regulatory burden long before sustainability reporting issues or regulations. So basically, there will be some reduction, postponing some of this regulation. It will be a burden for big companies, more than 1,000 people. Those will be the companies that need to follow this regulation. But again, it's postponing something that was recently introduced. And of course, it's really hard to cut regulations. We see it on national level. We see it on the EU level. It's basically sectoral policies that should be looked at. But I think that if we make distinction focusing on micro companies, because in Europe we are talking a lot about small and medium enterprises, which in many cases is basically the whole economy. I mean, in Bulgaria, this is 99% of the economy. So it seems that if we want to have targeted specific measures to cut bureaucratic and regulatory burden, it's very easy to do it on micro levels or micro companies, those that have up to 10 people. So a family business with a restaurant or in services or whatever, it's extremely easy to cut all reporting, basically, or almost all reporting for these companies, not just the sustainability reporting. I mean, the usual reporting and all the obligations that you have. So more focused on micro companies than, of course, trying to make simpler rules for the general economy, which will be SMEs. And then you have the debate for the big companies. I mean, this is where you have basically the debate on sustainability reporting and so on. So this is a bit different approach that I use, focusing additionally on micro companies.
But then isn't there a danger that you're creating a two-tier system? So Lina, would you like to jump in on this? If we create a regulatory framework in the EU where there's one rule for the smaller companies and another type of rule for larger companies, how do you see that happen?
Yeah, so I think, of course, Peter has some excellent points because the regulation is too burdensome, especially for smaller companies, and larger companies obviously have easier complying. But that doesn't call for differentiated regulation, in my opinion. I think that calls for it's a wake-up call. The regulation is too burdensome. If we need to do simplification efforts and moving thresholds and moving deadlines, maybe that's because the regulation is too burdensome and we should not have it at all. And I don't think it's a good solution to differentiate between different sizes of companies, because all companies should work under a similar framework, a regulatory framework, but it shouldn't be so burdensome that small companies are not able to keep up.
And one of the points that was addressed in the State of the Union speech was about the unfinished single market. So I would like to show a clip when Ursula von der Leyen outlines how that's a problem.
And honourable members, our greatest asset is the single market. But we all know it remains unfinished. The IMF estimates that the internal barriers within the single market are equivalent to a 45% tariff on goods and even a 100% tariff on services.
So when it comes to the practicalities, what are actually some of the de facto problems about the lack of harmonization or the barriers within the single market? Petar, that's more of a question to you, whether we can actually achieve zero barriers without full harmonization. And if we do have full harmonization, isn't there a danger that some of these rules are going to be set on a worse standard than the current national ones? So how do you resolve the issue that there is still a lot of barriers within the single market, but we may not want to move towards full harmonization?
The single market is the best asset of the EU. It's something that makes us competitive relative to the US, relative to China. And that's why we're focusing and discussing all the barriers that are still there. And you can look in two directions. One of the directions is the sectors where the single market doesn't exist or almost doesn't exist, especially in services. We can talk about finance, energy, telecommunications, especially telecommunications are a big topic now. And these were the sectors that were mentioned by Ursula von der Leyen specifically. And if you look at the data, these are the fields of the economy where Europe is lagging behind the US. So it's not a coincidence that all the fields that we haven't make the single market work are the fields that we are lagging behind, and we are not competitive. So one of these approaches should be to make the single market also for services, for capital markets, for movement of capital, especially for the digital sectors also, And the other thing, of course, is the so-called non-tariff barriers. So this is all the barriers that we have that have nothing to do with tariffs. All the nation states are doing different requirements that can stop the free movement of goods. We see it in Bulgaria. We see it with neighboring countries. It is a tradition of the EU to make the free movement of goods on paper being part of the single market, but then create these non-tariff barriers. And there are many initiatives, again, similar to the regulations. It's really hard to enforce that because a member state can always think of something like additional inspections at the border for some foods or whatever. And then you need just to delay a little bit and there is no single market because the trade needs to happen now. So there should be a focus on the non-tariff barriers and on the services where we don't have the real single market, especially in telecommunications. Every person living in the EU knows that it's one story when you go to the US, when there is a huge market for a couple of telecommunications companies, and another thing when you go to Europe and you see that it's the same model, but 27 models. So 27 countries with a few big players in telecommunication in each country. So this is something that needs to develop. Of course, it's linked to the regulatory burden. We can give an example of the 28 regime that's being discussed. So basically, this is your question. Can we simplify the rules in every country, stay competitive, so that you can register a company in Lithuania or in Denmark and play by their rules, so there will be a competition in the rules? Or should we create a new 28 regime and then give the option for the companies to choose that? But it goes with, as any harmonization effort, it goes with all kinds of complications. Let's say you have a problem, you need to go to court. Is the Bulgarian court going to follow the traditional framework that we have for companies, or is he going to acknowledge the new 28 regime, which will be a new tradition, new set of rules? This is extremely complicated and it will be really hard to work in practice. So it's better to simplify in every country, be competitive so you can choose based on taxes, based on regulations, and to have easy access to those markets.
So the 28th regime is one of the proposals of the Commission in order to not harmonize all the rules between member states, but as you mentioned, create this new level 28th regime where there are simplified rules, and if companies choose to follow that regime, then they can sidestep some of the national bureaucratic problems. But don't you think it's unrealistic that all 27 member states will liberalize their economies simultaneously and create a unified single market? So wouldn't the 28th regime solve some of the issues that we have talked about, the lack of competitiveness, the lack of ability to grow, et cetera, et cetera? So what's your take on that?
There is a potential that the 28th regime will bring some additional opportunity because it will play as additional opportunity. It will not replace the national frameworks. But again, I think it will be really complicated to put it in place. It will be sabotaged by the member states. It will be delayed as much as possible because, especially for countries, I think, like Bulgaria and the Central Eastern Europe, it's basically a different approach to how you make business than the legal tradition that we have. So to see the fruits of that, it will take years. I don't think that we will see it in 1 or 2 or in the midterm. But yeah, it's a possibility, maybe especially in the digital markets. Digital companies should have easier access to this regime, as they usually go beyond borders by definition, most of them. And also, probably it should help investments, foreign investment, as it makes it more secure for foreign players that they will face the same set of rules that they are used to. And this is also an opportunity for a country like Bulgaria when one of the obstacles for foreign investors from the EU also is that they are not sure that the legal framework will protect them the way that they are protected in Germany or in France.
So a lot more to do on that front. One of the big compliance costs that we know exists are related to environmental and energy regulations. And this is something that Ursula von der Leyen also addressed in her speech. So let's listen to that for a second.
With the Clean Industrial Deal, we have identified the main hurdles that slow down these sectors. So now we need to speed up with the implementation. And this is why the Commission proposed the 2040 targets, 10 years after the Paris Agreement. I know that many people are concerned about the scale of what is needed and what is ahead. And that is why the transition must support people, it must strengthen industry.
So the message is clear. The Green New Deal in different ways, but it's continuing under the name Clean Industrial Deal. Lina, what's your assessment? And this is a very complex regulatory framework. There are some good parts and bad parts. But is there actually a simpler approach to solving some of our environmental problems? Or is really the European Commission's approach the best that we can have?
So the European Commission actually has the framework to achieve a cost-efficient pathway to net zero. But they're not going down that pathway. They're actually making it much more costly than it has to be. And that, of course, means then they have to support, or they believe they have to support businesses and people because they are making it so costly. But if the Commission or the EU actually committed to doing this green transition cost efficiently, there shouldn't be a need to do specific support for people and industry.
So how would the efficient approach would look like?
So it would require some reform of the current climate policy in the EU. One of the most obvious would be to cut double regulation. There are many regulations, for example, regarding cars, where we set requirements for, we only want electric cars from 2035. And that simply doesn't make sense in the context of the emission trading system that's being implemented from 2027. Those two does not work well together. The trading system works extremely well on its own, but double regulation outside of that will just make the transition much more costly and not have a positive effect for the climate. So things like that, and also combining the two emission trading systems that will be in place, combining those to a single one, and also being able to include agriculture emissions from the EU. Those would be extremely important steps to achieve a cost-efficient path to net zero, and not the expensive path that we're on right now.
So why is the Commission choosing the costlier, less efficient option if there is another one clearly available to them that costs less money, is less bureaucratic to manage, and achieves the same environmental goals that we have set ourselves?
I think it's easier to communicate that it's that the EU puts a ban on fossil fuel cars than it is to communicate that emission trading system is a market-based approach that supports growth and technology neutral solutions and is the least expensive way to do it. So I think it's a political issue. I don't think it's a practical issue.
Petar, do you agree with the assessment?
Yeah, I do agree. I think that basically if we want to achieve any climate goals, we need to be open for all the solutions and let the market compete for the technology that brings these results faster. But then we need to remember that every transition means costs. It could be economic transition, it could be climate transition, but this brings cost for everybody who is doing business, for citizens. And we just can't do everything. We cannot stay competitive and secure economic growth, navigate the fiscal burden, invest heavily in defense. Ursula von der Leyen was in Bulgaria, I think, a week ago with the scandal with the plane and the GPS system and so on. But she was here not to investigate high-tech investment or industry or something like that, but focusing on defense, visiting the biggest company when it comes to defense and the investment that's coming with another German company. So focusing on defense, investing in defense, which will also have additional fiscal costs. And on top of all this, to have a super ambitious climate targets. So you just cannot achieve all of these. And of course, you need to balance. But if you want to achieve your climate targets, maybe don't push too hard with the midterm targets. And also try to have a policy that's open for all solutions without sector-specific obligations or requirements or restrictions, as in the automotive sector and so on.
Ursula von der Leyen also touched upon another area, why costs are so high in the energy market. So let's listen to her for a sec.
And costs are still structurally too high for industry. We know what drove prices up. That was dependency on Russian fossil fuels. So it's time to get rid of dirty Russian fossil fuels completely. This is why we will propose a new grids package to strengthen our grid infrastructure and speed up permitting.
So Ursula von der Leyen, I think partially rightly, outlined that the import of Russian fossil fuels, or the lack thereof, after the massive escalation in Ukraine by Russia, contributed to higher energy costs in Europe. But is that the only reason why we have high energy costs? If we compare before 2022, the US and EU prices, there was still a massive divergence between the two. So what can Europe do when it comes to reducing the cost of energy and meet our environmental targets by 2050?
So there are plenty of opportunities, because it's, as you say, it's not just the EU's fault that, or Russia's fault that we have high energy prices in the EU. It's also our own fault. So in the EU, there are across member states high energy taxes. In Denmark, we have very high energy taxes, but they have been decreased, but only for a 2-year period of time, and then it will increase again. And the EU has minimum levels of energy taxes, so those also obviously contribute to higher energy costs. And then we also have the market for energy, which could definitely be improved. This is regarding the free flow of energy across borders. That is not the case today, so there are improvements to be made across countries. And also, a last point here is EU member states should not be able to make energy decisions that negatively affect their neighboring countries. So the EU should actually go in and stop member states from decreasing the energy, or at least negatively affecting how the energy market works in the EU.
So practically what it would look like, the European Commission goes to Germany and says, no, you're not allowed to shut down perfectly functioning nuclear power stations because you're both endangering your own energy security and your neighbors.
Yeah, exactly. And then that also touches upon the next point here. So the energy market should, as Peter also mentioned before, should be technology neutral. So we shouldn't be phasing out natural gas or other energy sources. You should price the emissions, which we do with the emission trading system, and then the market should be allowed to work. And that is not how the politics is working today.
And if the market were let to be properly working, then we would have lower consumer prices at the end of it. Petar, did you want to come in first?
Yeah, we can give the example with Bulgaria and the region, the entire Balkan region, when we talk about grids and connectivity in energy market. It's usually the case that in some periods of the year, the electricity price in Bulgaria and the region will be much higher, 2-3 times higher than the electricity price in Western Europe, but also in Central Eastern Europe, which basically says that there is no market. If there is connectivity, if there is free market, then this should not be the case. It's like going to one neighborhood in Brussels, buying tomatoes, and then going to the next neighborhood and tomatoes are 3 times more expensive. This means that there is no market. There is some restrictions there. So it's the same. So that's why grids and connectivity and the free market is important. But also again, all the regulations that you have in the nation state and the state aid and everything. In Bulgaria, there is a price cap on electricity. So if you're a company, it doesn't matter if you're small, big, you may be a Russian large company in energy, and your price of electricity will be subsidized. And this is a state aid which is approved by the European Commission, which was, of course, used back in 2022, but it's still the case. So why to invest in technologies and transfer your usage of energy to more efficient ways and so on, when you have a price cap? So, I mean, the government defends you. Whatever you may have the biggest profits that you have for the last 20 years, and we will still subsidize your electricity. That's a stupid policy that leads basically to companies who don't want to change. They don't want to invest. They don't look for long-term contracts. All contracts in Bulgaria, electricity is day ahead. So basically, because you're not vulnerable, the government is vulnerable. It's not the company. So that some examples showing that there is a lot we can do when it comes to connectivity and to open market in energy sector.
Absolutely. But it's not just the cost of energy that was going up in recent years, but the cost of pretty much everything. And Ursula von der Leyen also touched on the topic of cost of living.
And this is important because we know how hard times have been for so many families, how costs have rocketed up, how people are making sacrifices to make ends meet. And I can announce today that we will boost our promotion budget to launch a new Buy European Food campaign, because we can proudly say that our European food is the best in the world.
Ursula von der Leyen outlined correctly that the cost of living has been going massively up. But in the same breath, she essentially calls for protectionist measures and encourages people to buy European rather than the best available price for the best available product. Lena, what do you think about this controversial statement?
I think this statement about buy European food is a great example of how the entire focus has shifted for the Commission. So before, with the Draghi report, we were talking about competitiveness, simplification, growth, and how all these stuff is extremely important. To now, the entire speech was so focused around protectionistic measures, such as buy European food, and that, exactly as you highlight, does not really play well with trying to reduce cost of living for EU citizens, because we want open markets. We want to trade with the outside of EU. We want businesses to thrive, and we want also consumers to face lower prices. And being protectionistic does not bring lower prices to consumers.
Petar, if the goal is to actually reduce the consumer prices across the European Union, instead of buy European food campaigns, what could or what should actually the European Commission do in this field?
And the interesting question is, what is European food? Obviously, I can buy it from Greece. Can I buy it from North Macedonia? Should I wait until they become a member of the EU and then it's European food? Should I buy it from Ukraine or from Serbia? I mean, what's the definition? When do you qualify to be called European food? And it's okay to buy the cheaper product and the most competitive product. I mean, this is, I think this brings us way back into the thinking of too much Europe that is not focusing on competitiveness, on growth. We know that these kind of movements and way of thought exist. We saw the example of Ukraine when 5 or 6 countries in Central Eastern Europe basically blocked the import of agricultural products from Ukraine, even though they are our allies. We help with the invasion and the conflict and everything. But when it comes to cheap products, all the Eastern countries say, no, we don't want to buy these products from Ukraine. They are too competitive and we need to do something. Again, we should talk about open borders. Central Eastern Europe is a good example. the countries that enter in 2004, 2007, they showed that when you enter a big market, you can win and you can be competitive and you can find new markets for your goods. Exports of all countries doubled or tripled or something like that. And then you can use, of course, all the goods and services that you can find on the wider EU market, which also helps. So talking about Buy European Food or Quality Jobs Act, it's not a line of thinking that is relatable to the competitiveness direction that it seems that the Commission is taking.
But to push back on the narrative, you call the European Commission's approach protectionistic. But this is what Ursula von der Leyen has to say about protectionism.
And honourable members, I do not believe in tariffs. Tariffs are taxes. And we ensure that Europe got the best possible deal out there. We have put our companies at a relative advantage because some of our direct competitors face much higher tariffs from the US. Yes, their baseline might be lower, but when you account for the exceptions that we secured and the additional rates which others have on top, we have the best agreement without any doubt.
So at least in words, Ursula von der Leyen is still trying to protect the international trading regime, trying to say that the European Union should negotiate new free trade agreements, trying to explain that she doesn't believe in tariffs and it's only because of US administration that she had to negotiate this deal that is worse than what we have had before. So seemingly the European Commission is still very much for an open trading regime. How do you save that open trading regime in a time of protectionism? What can the European Commission actually do in order to foster it?
Yeah, so I think there are some, it's positive that the Commission is opposing tariffs. So the wording is correct and positive, but it's not very believable when everything else in the speech that von der Leyen gave yesterday was all about protectionism, and we have to support European. We want everything on our own. We don't want to be on the mercy of our trade partners and so on. So not just words about trading with other regions, but also actually doing it and not doing these protectionistic measures as we are doing. They want to relax state aid rules and they want to buy European food and we want our own European AI. There are all the things that are very protectionistic and where we want to close around ourselves, and we should go away from that. We shouldn't close around ourselves. We should open up to the outside world and trade with those who are interested in trading with us instead of closing around ourselves.
Do you see some positive signs that this is happening? There were discussions about finally ratifying the Mercosur agreement. There are discussions about free trade agreements with India. There has been a deal with the United States, despite the fact it's not as good as many of us would have wanted. So there seems to be some movement around at least the negotiation of free trade agreements becoming more of a priority than before the US administration, the current US administration came into place.
Yeah, so I think this year we have seen some positive movements given the environment that the EU was working within. I think it has been pretty good. But that doesn't change that the wording now is Europe first. And that sounds oddly familiar. That sounds like America first. And I don't think that's a path we want to go down. Everyone in the world is looking at the US and asking, what are you doing? Why are you closing around yourself? Then I don't think the answer from the EU should be the same, that we should close around ourselves either. So I'm afraid that this might be a turning point of looking inwards instead of outwards.
Petar, what can we do in order to have the European Commission look outwards and not become the same kind of protectionistic regime as the United States?
Again, if we look at the economic freedom big fields, the places that we are competitive with the US, it will be stable money, it will be free trade, it will be the rule of law, in most of the countries. Of course, there are some exceptions in our region. But where we're lagging behind is regulations, and it's the size of the government, the fiscal pressure on governments in the EU, and the high taxes on capital, on income, on investments, basically on companies. In that picture, free trade is still something that we are competitive. We have a good stance in the world stage. Twice more goods are being traded within the single market than the goods that the entire EU is exporting outside of the EU, which means that, again, the biggest asset when it comes to free trade is the single market. We need to do everything we can to deepen it, integrate it, open it for services as much as possible, because we have some of the wealthiest countries in the world within this single market. And we have the competitive countries within our region, Central Eastern Europe, that are growing, and labor productivity is growing, and so on. And then we need to also to open up as much as possible. Obviously, it is hard when it comes to China, when it comes to the US, but there are also other markets. We need to play the game of those that still believe in globalization, that still believe that trading with others can bring competitive advantages and can make you wealthier. And I think this is the way to go. Again, the big challenge is how to do all of these. It could be competitiveness or climate goals or free trade and your stance on the global stage with all the fiscal pressure that you have. And we see what's happening in France. We saw what is the discussions that were in Romania. These are basically the two countries with the highest deficit currently. We saw what happened to Greece 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So this is the big debate, how to manage the fiscal pressure, the fiscal situation, and to have the ability to basically lower the burden when it comes to taxes and regulations to European businesses.
Quite a challenge. And in the last half an hour, we have talked a lot about barriers within the single market, about the reduction of bureaucracy, about trade. So as an overall assessment and looking only just at the economic policies outlined in Ursula von der Leyen's State of the Union address, what's your overall assessment, Lena, from 1 to 10? What is the current trajectory of the European Union when it comes to economic policy from a free market angle?
So I'm afraid I'm not able to give the speech more than a score of 3. And that's because I think I don't think it's an ambitious approach. There is barely any mention of deregulation. Simplification is only mentioned by a few words, which was the entire focus just 1 year ago, 6 months ago. And I don't see anything in this speech that seeks to promote competitiveness and growth. I think we are seeing much more protectionistic measures, as we talked about. I don't think this is the way that the EU should go. That is really standing out is the fact that there is no mention of the fiscal health of the member states, so no mention about the debt. I think that is ignoring one of the major, and that is why I cannot give it a score more than 3.
Fair. Petar, what's your assessment?
I approach something between 5 and 6. See what's happening in the global stage. We see in China. We see what's happening in the US. And crazy things that you can see. I think that what's happening in usually just words. It's not real actions when it comes to or real tangible change. At least narrative is focused on the important things. Not much on the fiscal, which is not the case in the US. So I think at least we talk about the real problems, and there is some initiative kind of starting, or at least some people in the Commission trying to push for those in the right direction. So that's why I give slightly above 5, because I see that it could be much worse.
I will take it. It's a perfect, mildly optimistic note to end on. Lina, Petar, I've really enjoyed your insights and this conversation. I hope you have enjoyed it too. If you did, please do subscribe to all the Epicenter channels below. And do let us know in the comments what you think, where the European Union should be heading for the next 5 years. Economic competitiveness, at least in words, is still on the agenda, but we obviously have to see how it will be delivered over the coming years. So do let us know your thoughts, and thank you so much for tuning in today.